Howdy, everybody, and sorry for the tardy start. I went to go get everything set up at 2:53, and Streamlabs, I guess, decided, in their infinite wisdom, to have some kind of big update thing or whatever, and it absolutely took me 20 minutes to try and get all my stuff reset and find everything. Oh, it was awful. So, this is BlindEyeLive. I have managed to salvage everything, get everything set back up in way quicker than I thought I would. But we're gonna roll the show. So, we got our AFC North preview today, but we got some big news as well today. Kevin Durant staying in Brooklyn. He and his friend and business partner Rich Kleiman sat down with owner Joe Tsai and his wife, general manager Sean Marks, head coach Steve Nash, and maybe a couple other people. And they have decided that they are going to move forward together. They are going to continue with their partnership, were their words. So, yeah. Called it. Of course, I wasn't streaming over the summer, but when this all broke out, I told all my friends and other people I talked to, it's like, Kevin Durant's going to play for the Nets this season. There is not a better basketball situation that he could get himself to. Period. There's not a better situation in the NBA for Kevin Durant than the Nets right now with their roster. Particularly if they keep Kyrie Irving around. There's no reason they should trade Kyrie at this point. That roster is incredible from a depth standpoint. Give me one quick second. Guys, give me one quick second. I've got to go find a way to do something for my parents because they apparently forgot to do something important. Okay, sorry, I am back. And for anybody watching this after the fact, thank you for being patient with me. So, anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So, Kevin Durant Kevin Durant will be staying a Brooklyn Net. The roster situation there is really good. And that's what I was going to bring up. So we're going to flip over to boom, which we'll be using Our Lads later, but I'm going to go over here to ESPN. And we're going to go to Nets. And we're just going to pull up their roster right now. Because, I'm sorry, you're going to leave a team where... Well, and the thing is, if he got traded to get Kevin Durant, teams were going to have to blow their team up for the most part. And the teams he wanted to go to, like the Suns, well, the whole Ayton situation basically meant they couldn't trade for him because they weren't trading Devin Booker. The Nets weren't going to accept Chris Paul. And I'm sorry, like, I like Michael Bridges and Cameron Johnson, but those two guys and picks aren't enough for Kevin Durant. And no one else. Like, the Miami Heat couldn't trade Bam Adebayo. So, and weren't going to trade Bam Adebayo. So what was Miami going to trade to Brooklyn? Like Kevin Durant, I don't think Kevin Durant understood the situation he was in from a, like, the assets it was going to take standpoint. And just where the league's at right now. But just look at this Nets roster. You've got Seth Curry, Nick Claxton, LaMarcus Aldridge, who can do stuff for you off the bench. Blake Griffin, once again, is still here. Joe Harris will be back healthy. You've still got Kyrie Irving. Patty Mills is on this roster. They just got Royce O'Neal to be a defensive stopper, bench forward. Day'Ron Sharpe, who they drafted last year, I think has a lot of potential as a young big, like as a rotational big. I don't necessarily think he's going to turn into some great starter, but they should get something from Ben Simmons this year. They were able to acquire Edmund Sumner and TJ Warren from the Pacers, signed them in free agency. Sumner's a solid bench guard, into the rotation guard. TJ Warren gives them an incredible bench scorer. And they also have Cam Thomas, who has shown some really great flashes as a scorer so far the last two summer leagues. I really believe in Cam Thomas as a scorer. I'm sorry, this is a really, really good roster. And I don't know. Like, this is a championship roster. I don't give a crap what anyone says. Now, that's up to Durant and Irving staying healthy and playing. But around them, the Nets have as good a roster as anyone could have put around him. The only team, if he'd asked for this in time, maybe the Timberwolves trade for Kevin Durant. If, he would have okayed that trade. Although he doesn't have a no-trade clause and he just signed a big extension, so if anything, it's like a team would trade for Kevin Durant because they're like, well, you've got 4 years. It's like you've got 4 years or so of team control right now. It's 4 or 5, but I think it's 4. So, either way, your starting 5 this year should be this depends on... this does depend on what the Nets decide to do with Kyrie Irving. I would keep him. I think Kyrie's a really good player, and he showed he's still a superstar player last year. And I think he'll be more consistent this year. KD and Kyrie is an elite 1-2 combo. So Kyrie's at the point. KD, you slot him at one of the forward spots. You've got Joe Harris, who I would start. I would start Nicholas Claxton at center. Obviously I would make that decision. And then you could play around with who else you want to play where. for certain games, maybe you start T.J. Warren. Other games, maybe you start, like if you're playing Portland, you could, like this season, because of the size of Lillard and Anthony Simons, I'd feel comfortable starting Seth Curry in that game next to Kyrie Irving and bringing Warren off the bench. Maybe you bring Harris off the bench. They've just got so many freaking ways to mix and match here. Like, your guard rotation is Irving, Curry, Mills, Cam Thomas. Kind of like that. Your wing rotation is Durant. Well, let's say wings and forwards. Your wing and forward rotations are Durant, Warren, Harris, Royce O'Neal. That's not a bad 4-piece combo right there. And then behind them you've got and then your big rotation, you've got Claxton, you've got Aldridge, Sharp, and Griffin. And it's not like they can't do something to make a move to add like another player at some point, or like another big at some point who's maybe a little better or who's better defensively, but then say like a Griffin or an Aldridge. Although they're kind of hoping Sharp, does some of that or is that kind of guy, but I don't know. I like what they're doing there. Oh, I forgot Sumner in the guard rotation. Like as your, fourth or fifth guy, like battling with Thomas. I don't know. Like the offensive firepower they've got, their defense only has to be so good. Well, and they can do that. Like Durant's shown what kind of, that he can get to, high-end defensive levels. Irving, in big moments, has played, above average to good defense. Like, he has the tools. That's what, one of the reasons they brought in Royce O'Neal is his defense and grit. I feel like, but I feel like now with Durant here, with Durant in Brooklyn, because I'm a Grizzlies fan, and I live in Beaumont, Texas, so with Durant in the fold, guaranteed, they could do stuff. Oh, and I forgot Ben Simmons, because Ben Simmons didn't play last year, but Ben Simmons is on this roster. And you want to talk about a guy who can defend everywhere and be like a connector type player. Now, do I have any faith in Ben Simmons to, want to do anything? No. But we'll see. He's in a position here where, in my opinion, he's in the best basketball situation he's been in his career with the players around him. Like, Simmons' role is, is very clear, very obvious. But will he buy in? Who the heck knows at this point? I don't have any faith in him. So, that being said, so Kevin Durant staying in Brooklyn. We'll see what happens with Kyrie, but I think this means Kyrie Irving's there too. I don't see how they'd be able to move Kyrie and still be as good of a team now. Like, that one just doesn't... That one doesn't track for me. And I just think a lot of teams have... I think there's a lot of teams that have said, look, Kevin Durant just seems to be getting really finicky. It's like, most everybody understands why he left OKC and went to Golden State. I think people, to a degree, understood why he left Golden State and chose Brooklyn. But now everyone's like, the problem in Brooklyn hasn't necessarily been the organization, although I think they made a massive mistake trading for James Harden. Don't get me wrong there. But the organization is bent over backwards except for maybe, not fighting for Kyrie Irving's right to play last year. That could be, that could be a thing for sure. But I think a lot of people are like, Kevin Durant is entering his mid 30s with a fairly lengthy injury history now. And he's played 90 games since coming to Brooklyn? Missed the whole first season. I I wouldn't want to trade all that stuff for him. This is not the same as when the Clippers made the trade for Paul George, which basically was them trading for Paul George and guaranteeing the signature of Kawhi Leonard. When you look at what they gave up, it was really for Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Those guys were younger and had health. They had their injury stuff too, but it's like they were younger and it wasn't quite as bad at the time, or seemingly. But note, in their 3 years together now, those two guys have played 82 games together with the Clippers. Now, the Lakers have won a title since trading for Anthony Davis, but everything has unraveled since then. And a lot of people a lot of teams are like, do we really want to go or spend the kind of picks or put the assets out that the Lakers got for Anthony Davis with maybe less of a runway and less of a likelihood of winning a title? Because, right now, there's some really stinking good teams out there right now. You look at what Milwaukee traded to get Drew Holiday. And it got them a title. But they had Giannis already. They had Chris Middleton. And they didn't have to gut their roster. Although they did send out a lot of picks. But they were contenders last year. If they'd had a little better injury. If Chris Middleton doesn't get hurt, I think we would have been looking at a Warriors-Bucks final instead of the Celtics. But, and you look at what the roster the Celtics have built, and look at what the Pelicans are building with the assets they've gotten from the Davis and Holiday trades. Maybe they didn't hit on all the assets, but some of those assets they used to flip for C.J. McCollum. They got Josh Hart from the Lakers trade. Nickel Alexander-Walker they acquired they acquired him, the pick that was used to take him in trades. They've got all the Holiday stuff coming. And honestly, I really like some of the picks they made. They nailed the Herb Jones pick. I still like the Trey Murphy pick. I think his name's Trey. Who they drafted 17th overall last year out of Virginia. I think he'll be a good fit for them long term. They didn't necessarily maximize value of Lonzo Ball, but considering Lonzo's health situation right now, if Lonzo doesn't get hurt, we're probably talking a little differently right now. Because, when that contract was signed, people kind of understood it. People were like, most of the thinking people were like, Lonzo Ball contract's actually pretty good. And if he can get back to healthy, it'll still kind of feel like a miss. But considering they now have C.J. McCollum, the move they made for Devontae Graham doesn't look quite as bad right now. And going and getting Jonas Valanciunas looked good. I liked that trade last year for the Grizzlies, but I didn't hate it for the Pelicans either, because I really like Jonas Valanciunas. But it seems like the trade benefited both. It also benefited Steven Adams, I think. I think that trade really benefited both teams. And I really like Zaire Williams, who we drafted at 10. Anyway, there's a lot of good teams around the league. Like I said, Milwaukee, Boston. I think if Miami was healthier last year, well, and the weird just fall off from Duncan Robinson after he signed his contract, that was weird. But, Max Struss and Gabe Vincent both stepped up. I mean, to a degree that, they were better starting options than Tyler Hero in the playoffs. They've got Victor Oladipo back, and Vic showed some big flashes last year. Kyle Lowry can stay healthy, although once again, this is a guy, in his mid-30s. I think the fall is, I think Lowry's about to hit the wall. I hope I'm wrong, because I love Kyle Lowry as a player. He's awesome. But I'm just going to say, I like what Toronto's building. I think Scotty Barnes is going to take a big jump in year 2. Because, he was... Even those of us who really like Scotty Barnes, I think a lot of us were even shocked by how good he was putting the ball in the basket last year. Like, his scoring ability. But every other thing we thought was going to translate immediately did. And some even in bigger ways than we expected. And if he improves his three-point shooting at all this year, or should I say if he can bump his three-point shooting up a decent clip, he's going to be crazy. I like what Cleveland's building. There's a lot of young teams that are like, you know what? We're going to play this out in the long run, and we're going to bet on we're playing for the next generation. And I think that's smart for a lot of those teams. And I think Brooklyn's looking out a little bit here. And I'm glad to see Joe Tsai just put his foot down and said, look, we're not firing Sean Marks and Steve Nash. Marks built this thing. We brought in Steve Nash. It's like we believe in Steve Nash. I love Steve Nash. I believe in Steve Nash. People were criticizing the offense last year in the playoffs. It's like I think that was a product of what was going on with the roster, and I think there was a little bit. I think a little bit of that was on some of the players too. I think this year, with better health, and if Durant and Irving buy in, I would argue they're title favorites with that roster, in my opinion. And I didn't even mention Philadelphia, because Harden's always like, at this point, do you trust him? But I love Embiid. That guy has the heart of a freaking champion. Love Tyrese Maxey. I think they've got a great roster. Bringing in PJ Tucker. They still have Matisse Thybulle. They've got Tobias Harris. He might be overpaid, but he's a really good player. The East's going to be tough, but I think the Nets are... I think the Nets are legit. So, with that being said, we're going to get off the NBA. We're going to get into... we're going to hit some other news real quick. Some Tennessee Vols news. One of our linebackers, he transferred in from Michigan with Joe Milton last year. Is it Walter Mohan? his last name's Mohan, Mohan. He has been suspended indefinitely from the program following an arrest for domestic aggravated assault. And I've read the story. I'm not going to get into it. I think it's pretty plausible. The story. Let's just say one hand on face, other hand on throat. Let's put it this way. He showed up at girl's apartment drunk. She, instead of, having him make some kind of scene, whatever, she rushed him into the apartment, but she was trying to deal with him until he could, detox or, kind of sober up a bit, and things went south. Because he was wanting things and she was not. And he decided to get physical. That is the story. This is, these are the allegations. He has been arrested. There is at least one other witness, roommate, or her roommate, who is also involved in this. Yeah, so, but, I mean, you hate to hear these stories. We'll see what ends up coming of it. I do believe that the university is handling it properly. Immediate suspension while this is being figured out. I think it was the right call by Josh Heupel. And very different way of handling things from, maybe other coaching staffs in recent years. I'm not going to name other schools. I don't want to trash, schools that have new staffs, new authorities at the universities. Should I say new regimes that are trying to clean up those messes, but, And I think this is handled better than previous Tennessee staffs might have handled it as well. So, good on Coach Heupel for being on top of this. But we'll see what happens, and we'll see if there's any new information that comes out that changes my mind. But from what I read, it seems to check out. So, that's in the news. Also, Chargers corner J.C. Jackson had to have some kind of minor ankle procedure. He's going to be out 2 to 4 weeks. There's someone else I saw is going to be out like 4 weeks. Let me pop back over here to... Well, let's hit up the NFL page on ESPN. Just hit some headlines before we get into... Ding. Okay. So, NFL's most likely to improve. Barnwell's got that article out. Okay. Young, that's who it was. So, Chase Young, Commanders, young star defensive end. He could miss at least the first, or he's out at least 4 games. So, I don't know if that's including preseason or if they're meaning he's going to miss like the first month of the season at least. Lions move top pick. Okay, so the Lions have moved Jamison Williams to the reserve non-football injury list, which is weird because he was injured in a football game in college. So I don't know what that means exactly. Let's see, Aaron Rodgers. Pack starters out of preseason finale. Okay. Dolphins, Mackenzie Alexander placed on season-ending injured reserve. So, I talked about Marquise Alexander last night. Well, he's out. Yesterday on the show. He's out. Chiefs tight end Blake Bell sidelined with unusual hip injury. We might read that real quick. Bates. Oh, Jesse Bates is back with the Bengals. He has signed his franchise tag tender. I expected that to happen. Texans first team president. Oh, the initial Houston Texans team president has passed away at 56. Man, that is young. Okay. So let's check out this Jameson Williams story real quick. So this list means he won't be available for the first 4 weeks of the 2022 season. The team announced it is placed. This is not a shock. I didn't think he'd be ready necessarily, or he'd be 100% for week 1. He might be. And he might be close to it by week 1, but I like them playing this safe, making sure he's fully recovered. And this helps them keep another player on the roster, on the active roster right now. They had to trim down to 80 players by this afternoon. By rule, Williams, who was selected 12th overall, can't be activated until after the 4th regular season game. Williams is continuing to recover from a torn ACL, which he suffered in January during the national championship game for Alabama. I think that injury is actually the reason Alabama lost that game. If Jameson Williams doesn't tear his ACL, Alabama's offense doesn't get just completely shut down. Because they were playing they were playing really well when he was healthy, when he was on the field. The Lions staff is monitoring his progression at a steady pace. Although he hadn't been a physical participant, Williams has been at the Allen Park practice facility throughout training camp, taking part in meetings. He also made the trip to Indianapolis for the Lions joint practice with the Colts, as well as the second preseason game against Indianapolis. I think we get a little more hands-on with him. Lions head coach Dan Campbell said of Williams traveling with the team to Indianapolis, it keeps him engaged in the football, in the meetings. We get a little more hands-on with the rehab, and then he gets to stay engaged in this environment. I mean, this is a different environment, and I think any and all of this stuff is great for him. For somebody that's young and learning what it needs to be or what it needs to look like, this is good. I think what he says, what he needs to be, what he needs to look like, whatever. He will wear number 9 for the Lions. Okay, cool. In other moves Tuesday, the Lions released linebacker Sean Dion Hamilton and placed fullback Jason Kabinda, ankle, and defensive lineman Romeo Okwara, Achilles, and Josh Paschal, sports hernia, on the reserve physically unable to perform list. All 3 players on the reserve PUP list will also have to miss at least the first 4 weeks or first 4 games of the season. Okwara, I believe, he injured his Achilles last season, so he's still recovering. Paschal was their second-round pick. I think he's going to be a perfect fit for their defense. So those are some moves by the Lions. Anyway, let's get into... Or, wait a second, actually. Before I do that, I forgot. Okay, Kansas City Chiefs tight end Blake Bell out after surgery for unusual hip flexor injury. Chiefs tight end Blake Bell, former Oklahoma Sooners, whatever. University of Oklahoma quarterback Blake Bell, now a tight end, had surgery to repair what Coach Andy Reid has termed an unusual hip flexor injury, leaving them without their primary backup to Travis Kelce for at least the start of the regular season. Bell hurt the hip on a touchdown catch during the Chiefs' preseason opener August 13th in Chicago. He tried to play through it, but unfortunately left the game. The veteran tight end has not played or practiced since. Asked whether Bell might return, when he might turn to the field Wednesday, Andy Reid said, "I think it's going to be real quick." Reid didn't say whether Bell would be placed on the injured reserve next week. I don't need that. When teams are required to reduce their rosters down to the limit of 53 players, the Chiefs, who play their preseason finale against Green Bay on Thursday night, better equipped to deal with an injury at tight end than perhaps any other position group. Kelsey has been one of the best in the league the past several years, and the Chiefs have replaced or have capable backups in Jody Fortson and second-year pro Noah Gray, who I really like Noah Gray. Fortson, who is coming back from a season-ending injury on his Achilles tendon, had 2 touchdown receptions in last weekend's preseason game against Washington. Gray appeared in all 16 games as a rookie last season. Yeah, their tight end position is really good. So, but they said an unusual hip flexor injury. I wish that was expanded upon more. Okay. So, let's look at the AFC North now. And, of course, we'll go in alphabetical order. This is not like yesterday where I thought the teams would finish top to bottom, but we're gonna do this. So, with the Ravens starting at receiver, because I like to go over the rosters, and that's more what I did yesterday. I'm going to shift the way I do things a little bit today, because I didn't like how I did things 100% yesterday, because I'm still getting back into it. Okay, we're good. So at receiver, they traded Marquise Brown to the Arizona Cardinals. The picks they used, well, the first rounder they got back, they used on Tyler Linderbaum, who we'll talk about here in a minute. So this will move Rashad Bateman to number 1 on the depth chart. They believe he is legit, which over the last 12 games of last season, once he was kind of 100% healthy and in the lineup, he had pretty much, I think he was only like 40-something yards off of Marquise Brown over that stretch. And I think from a pure receiver standpoint, I think he's actually, well, should I say, I think he's a better all-around receiver than Marquise Brown. Beyond Bateman, who I think is going to have a big year, they've got Devin Duvernay and James Proche II listed as the next 2 receivers. It's weird they have Proche in the slot and Duvernay outside, because I think it's going to be reversed there. They also have Benjamin Victor, who they picked up as a street free agent in 2021. Victor's a big-bodied receiver who played his college ball at Ohio State. They signed DeMarcus Robinson from the Chiefs, and he'll factor into that number 2 role outside as well, as will Tylan Wallace, which this is a team that's predicated on they're going to run the ball, they're going to lead the league in rushing, most likely this year if everyone stays healthy. And I would also say, like, they're going to, we know they're going to use a bunch of tight ends. I mean, heck, they had one of the best 1-2 or like top 2 1-2 tight end combos in the league. And we'll get into that. And they drafted 2 more this year. So, but beyond those first 6 guys, they also have several undrafted free agents this year. They picked up Mekhi Polk, Shamar Bridges, and Raleigh Webb. I don't know if any of them will make the roster. If I had to bet on one, it would be Mekhi Polk making it. But I would say, and if I'm ranking the receivers in order, like how I would have them, which I'm not in camp, I'm not in the, there with the team. I don't know what they're talking about. And I know, our lads, they're doing their best to give you as accurate a depth chart as they can gather. But Rashad Bateman's going to be the number one. Devin Duvernay, I would say, I would think he's going to start in the slot. And I would imagine Robinson would be over the top of Proche for the second outside receiver role. But they really like Proche, who was a 6th round pick in 2020. They like Wallace too, who was a 4th round pick last year, but Proche is a little more familiar with the offense. I would say that, Wallace is your number 5 receiver right now behind Proche, and then Victor's number 6. Moving on from the receiving room, which, people could say, without Marquise Brown, they lost some, breakaway speed. I still really like their receiving core. I thought Tylan Wallace was a top 100 player in 2021. He fell the 4th round. I really like Devin Duvernay in 2020. I like James Proche in 2020 as well. He was one of my favorite day 3 picks. But I don't know if those guys have all been in the best situation. I mean, one of the reasons Marquise Brown wanted out of Baltimore, he didn't like the situation he was in. Offensive line-wise, Ronnie Stanley, which he's on the physically unable to perform list right now. He should be good to go for week 1. But he's going to be eventually the starting left tackle. Behind him is veteran Juwan James, former Tennessee Vol and longtime starter in the league. They picked him up last year. But he'll likely... he right now is listed as their swing tackle. They've got Morgan Moses starting at right tackle right now. And they have one of the best groups of tackles and tackle depth in the league, in my opinion. Because behind Stanley and Moses, you got Juwan James. They drafted Daniel Faalele in the 4th round. Another guy, you want to talk about one of the weirder slides in the draft. I don't know how he fell in the 4th round. I thought he might go in the back end of the 1st because of his physical tools. But for me, he was easily a top 50 player. Goes in the 4th round. He's great. And Tyree Phillips, who's listed at guard here, can also slide out to tackle. And then, of course, they also have David Sharp as a 5th tackle. Now, on the interior, right now, Ben Powers and Kevin Zeitler are listed as your starting guards, alongside Tyler Linderbaum, who, not a shock that he's going to be starting from day 1 at center. I really am surprised that Ben Cleveland has not taken that starter's job, him or Phillips. But I like Cleveland and Phillips, and I think their guard position is going to be really good this year. And then moving Patrick McCarry to your backup center role instead of a starter is good. Also, Patrick McCarry, not a bad follow on Twitter. Or at least he used to be. I don't see his tweets much these days. Anyway, behind them, Jimmy Murray, Tristan Colon, and Khalil McKenzie. I don't know if any of those guys will make the roster. Moving to tight end, like I said, their tight end room might be the best in the league if you're just taking everyone into account. Mark Andrews currently is a top 5 tight end in the league right now. Nick Boyle is one of the best all-around tight ends, one of the best blocking tight ends, but he's a really good underneath receiver as well. He's got really consistent hands. Not the most athletic or dynamic, but that's fine. He's maybe the best second tight end in the league. Unless you're looking at maybe the Patriots depth chart where they've got, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. And then they had 2 draft picks in the 4th round this year. They drafted Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler, who they have Likely listed ahead of him on the depth chart. Kohler really is kind of like another Mark Andrews or more of a Travis Kelce type. Isaiah Likely's more of a receiving type too as well, but he's got a little bit of a different body. Than Kohler. And Likely, I think, will work really, really well as a move tight end, motioning across the formation. He's a good move blocker. And then they also have Josh Oliver and Tony Poljan on the roster. I really like their tight end room. By the way, every time they drafted 2 tight ends in the same draft, one of those guys tended to really work out. Well, actually, usually both of them are at least pretty good. But this strategy tends to work out for them. Because they drafted Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews in the same draft. They drafted Ed Dixon and Dennis Pitta in the same draft. And there was another time they did it as well, and I'm blanking on that one. Okay. Quarterback, Lamar Jackson, back healthy. You feel really good about your backup quarterback spot with Tyler Huntley, with what he showed last year. But you're obviously hoping Lamar Jackson will stay healthy, which better health on the offensive line will help that for sure. And they picked up Anthony Brown, former Boston College and quarterback who transferred to Oregon, and in my opinion, kind of held that team back in ways last year. He's on the roster, but he's not going to matter unless Lamar gets hurt. At running back, you've got J.K. Dobbins back after tearing his ACL last year, unfortunately. They picked up Mike Davis. I'm kind of wondering why he's so high on the depth chart. I'm not even seeing Gus Edwards. Well, Edwards might still be out. Let me move down here to the reserves. Let's see. Vince Beagle's on IR. Trent Harris is on IR. Gus Edwards still on the PUP list. And rookie Slade Bolden, well, it says waived, injured, maybe? Did they pick him up on waivers and he's injured? Or anyway. So Gus Edwards still on the physically unable to perform list because he would be in that number 2 running back role instead of Davis. But Mike Davis is a solid backup. I loved the 6th round pick of Tyler Beatty. Really great. He's a really good jitterbug back, really good hands out of the backfield. He's not going to be like a between the tackles guy at the NFL level, but in a 3rd down role, I think he's got a lot of potential, and as a returner. They still have Justice Hill, and then behind those guys they have Nate McCrary. Fullback, Patrick Ricard still around, playing both ways. And they also drafted Ben Mason in the 5th round last year. So they've got a deep backfield. They use their fullbacks. I think this team should be better offensively because I don't see how they could be as injured this year. It's not like they're the Chargers. On defense, Calais Campbell is back. Michael Pierce, after a brief stint in Minnesota, is here playing nose tackle again for them. They also have Justin Matabuke, who was their 3rd round pick in 2020, also slated as a starter. They brought in Brent Urban, who's a solid depth piece. I loved the Travis Jones pick in the 3rd round. That guy has, once again, another guy. I don't know how he got to the 3rd round. Because his athleticism is ridiculous. You're talking about a guy who, this guy was dominant at UConn. UConn stinks. But when he played against Clemson, it was clear that he was the best player on the field when he was on the field. Well, or at least that he was significantly better than Clemson's offensive line. Um, you know, when you've got a guy who's 6'4", 334, and he's not Jordan Davis, but this guy, I think, still was around a 5-second 40, or he might have dropped below 5 seconds. He might have gotten the 4.9s, but dude's ridiculously quick. He's ridiculously strong for his size. And in a draft that didn't have Jordan Davis, Travis Jones probably ends up going quicker. I still am shocked he fell to the third round. They also have Broderick Washington, who they drafted in the 5th round in 2020. They've got Rayshad Nichols, who they got as an undrafted free agent this year. Former undrafted free agent Aaron Crawford. And they also have Isaiah Mack on their roster. I think their interior line is going to be really good, as usual, really stout. I think Travis Jones is going to have an impact this year, for sure. Now, edge is going to be a lot more fun for them. So they've got Odafe Owe, who really came on down the stretch. That guy has insane athleticism and traits. He's ridiculous. They have Tyus Bowser, who's on the physically unable to perform list, but he should be ready for week 1. He's been a Raven for years now. They brought in, it's like they have Justin Houston here. They drafted David Ajabo in the 2nd round. He tore his Achilles back in March during the Michigan Pro Day. I'm not worried about David Ajabo, like, long term, though. He was a top 15 player in this draft. Before the injury, I had the Ravens taking him with their 1st round pick. They end up getting him in the 2nd round. They might have gotten the 3 most Raven players at the top of the draft in Ojabo, Linderbaum, and Kyle Hamilton, in my opinion. These guys just totally make sense in this uniform. Ojabo is going to be really great, and it's also a cool story because he and Odafe Owe are really, really close. They went to the same, it was like, I think, boarding school or something like that. They've been friends forever, should I say, they've been friends for years. Ojabo looks up to Owe as kind of like, a little bit like an older brother. So this is a really cool story that they get to be teammates at the next level. They also still have, Stephen Means, Dalen Hayes, and 2 undrafted free agents in Chuck Wiley and Jeremiah Moon. I think Jeremiah Moon has some upside. I think he could actually make this roster. Or at least eventually. Dalen Hayes, they drafted in the 5th round last year. So that's edge. Once again, some of this is people getting healthy to a degree, but I think by the end of the year, I think David Ojabo will play football this year. Guys have been coming back really quickly from Achilles injuries. You get to December, it wouldn't shock me if Ojabo's actually seeing some snaps. Now, it also wouldn't surprise me if they had him sit the whole year, but he could be back. Now, moving to the interior of the linebacker core, Josh Bynes is still here after they picked him up as an undrafted free agent in 2011. Patrick Queen still starting. Malik Harrison still here, 3rd round pick from 2020. Christian Welch, who was an undrafted free agent in 2020. They like him. And then they brought in 2 other undrafted guys this year, Josh Ross and Zacoby McClain. So Zacoby McClain's a guy I thought would get drafted as well. And if I'm remembering correctly, Josh Bynes was undrafted out of Auburn. So is Zacoby McClain. That's an archetype that tends to work here in Baltimore. And they really like Christian Welch. But if I was going to pick a position group, like Queen still has a decent amount to prove here. If I was going to pick the weakest position group on the team, or the one that I think people might have the most questions about, I'd actually argue it's the interior line or the inside linebacker group. Now moving to the secondary. Now their secondary was so hit by injuries last year, it was ridiculous. Take a minute. I don't. Sorry, I had some alert pop-ups. All right, moving to secondary. Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey are your starting outside corners. If they're healthy, you've got a really good tandem. They signed Kyle Fuller to be their starting slot corner, which should be good for them. Like, Kyle maybe can't hack it outside anymore, but I think he can more than hack it inside. Demarion Williams, they drafted in the 4th round. Went a little higher than I expected, but they're really high on him. They drafted Jalen Amore Davis, also in the 4th round, as a developmental outside corner. They love their Alabama corners. Long, speedy, athletic Alabama corners. And then last year's 3rd round pick, Brandon Stevens, is still here. He's their backup in the slot. Undrafted free agent David Vereen is listed as a 3rd stringer in the slot here. They have Kevin Seymour on the roster. He could also factor in its slot, as could Daryl Worley, who's had some issues staying on the field in his career. But the top of their cornerback room, you got to like it, and they've got young developmental corners they believe in. At safety is super deep for them this year. They love Chuck Clark. Marcus Williams was a great signing. Like, very few safeties in the league with his range in center field. He's going to fit in great with their scheme. Kyle Hamilton is going to rotate. He's going to play an interesting role. You know, there are people talking about, like, you know, him getting burnt in some one-on-one stuff against wide receivers in training camp. I'm not worried about that because that's not really the stuff he's going to be doing in this defense. He's going to be playing on a box safety. I think he's going to be playing some sub-package linebacker. They're going to use him around or moving him around. But he's going to be affecting the middle of the field and the flat. And they're going to use him a decent amount, I believe, as a blitzer. Tony Jefferson, solid veteran safety, backup safety. They like Geno Stone. He was one of my steals of the 2020 draft just because of his value. I thought he'd go in the 4th round. He went in the 7th. But I really liked his tape coming out of Iowa. And they also have Ardarius Washington, who somehow went undrafted last year. I think their safety room is really deep with some really intriguing players. Although, I would say this, like, Clark, Jefferson, Hamilton, Washington, really you're going to use those guys mostly in 2 high safeties or in 2 high coverage, or you're going to bring them down. Clark can play single high, but his range isn't amazing. Marcus Williams and Geno Stone have better range as free safety types, but really like their secondary. And then they also used another 4th round pick on Jordan Stout, who ended up being the first punter drafted. I think he went ahead of Jake Camarda. I can't remember. It was one of those two. But Jordan Stout went in the 4th round. And some people, I know, how am I blanking on his name? The other co-host with Brett from Bootleg. Man, I'm a bad person for forgetting his name. But Jordan Stout was his number 1 punter. And if the Ravens believe he can replace Sam Cook, then he might be the number 1 punter in this draft. One of the teams with, arguably the most consistent special teams team, like consistently great special teams team in the league for well over a decade now. They got Justin Tucker, of course, at kicker. Don't have to say much there. Nick Moore is their long snapper. Their return man, Devin Duvernay is their top return guy. With Justice Hill, James Proche, Demarion Williams, and Tyler Beatty factoring in behind him. I'm not shocked to see Beatty in there. And then some notable guys who are injured right now. Vince Beagle, who would definitely would have been nice to have on the edge for depth. Trent Harris along the defensive front. Gus Edwards, I believe, will be back shortly. But so there's the Ravens. I'm going to say this. I think it's a two-horse race for the AFC North title between the Bengals and the Ravens, and I think it's going to be really close. But you're definitely looking at, I think, a guaranteed double-digit win season for the Ravens this year. But they are second in the division to me because I believe the Cincinnati Bengals are going to win the division this year again. I know there's some people that are kind of poo-pooing what they did last season, that they really shouldn't have made the Super Bowl and this and that. Well, this team got better in ways that are going to mitigate some of the numbers nerd stuff that, which I like advanced statistics. I like to nerd. But some of those things, they're not just going to, it's not going to be the same the next year if you change enough stuff on the roster and you make other changes. Not to mention, you've got so many young guys who are going to get better this next year. Jamar Chase was a rookie last year and was insane. He's going to be probably even more insane this year. T. Higgins going into year 3. Higgins is awesome. He'd be in for a number of teams around the league, probably be a number 1 receiver. Tyler Boyd as your third best receiver is not fair to anybody. One of the best slot players in the league. And then they've had some turnover behind those guys, but they like a number of these guys. They really like Stanley Morgan, who they got undrafted in 2019. They brought in Mike Thomas, who will also help on special teams. Same with Trent Taylor. Trent Irwin is still around. He's been around their practice squad for years now. And then they picked up Kendrick Pryor and Kwame Lassiter II as undrafted free agents. And I think Lassiter could sneak onto this roster. Moving to the offensive line, this is where the big stuff, like the big movement, has happened. So Jonah Williams is still slated to start at left tackle. He's going into year 4. We'll see how that goes. The big signings, they signed Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, and Lael Collins this offseason. And those guys are going to step in, and they're going to be better starters than they had at any of those positions last year. And really significantly so. The big thing is 4th-round pick Cordell Volson out of the University of North Dakota looks like he is going to be the starter at left guard. North Dakota State. 6'7", 315. He's a tall boy for guard. But so far, the word is he's going to start over Jackson Carman, who was their 2nd-round pick last year. Which means Jackson Carman is probably going to be just a swing lineman all over the place. Not just at guard, but I think he could also factor into backup offensive tackle. But they've drafted a number of guys at those positions. They've drafted guys the last 2 years all over the line. 4th-round pick Deontay Smith from last season. They have him as their backup left tackle. They've got Trey Hill, who they drafted out of Georgia in the 6th round last year. And I think eventually they believe he will take over, or he will replace Ted Karras eventually. 2020 6th round pick, Hakeem Adeniji out of Kansas is their backup right guard. And they have Isaiah Prince, who was starting at right tackle for them last year after they claimed him off waivers from Miami. He is back, and he's backing up at right tackle. Behind them, they have undrafted free agents Devin Cochran, Desmond Noel. They also brought in Nate Gilliam as a free agent this offseason, and Lamont Galliard. Who Galliard has some nice physical tools, but he's just never really been able to put it together and really be a factor as a player. But they are much deeper, and all these young guys. I mean, look at all these guys they've drafted since 2019 here. Guys who are in their second, third years in the league. In Smith, Carmen, Hill, Adeniji, Price, Volson's a rookie. Like, some of these guys are just having to, I mean, they're becoming good players. Or, they're on the path. Like, they're having to develop. I think the Bengals are going to be both better and deeper this year because of the moves they've made. Now, at tight end, they did lose C.J. Ozema, but they were able to bring in Hayden Hurst, and that might actually improve their blocking without losing much receiving-wise. And to be honest, Hurst's a really good athlete. He could have his best season as a pro this year. They still have Drew Sample, who's been a really consistent, backup tight end for them since drafting him in 2019 in the 2nd round. They have Mitchell Wilcox, who was an undrafted guy in 2020. They also have Thaddeus Moss, who they claimed off waivers from Washington. He had a very unfortunate play and collision with Kayvon Thibodeau that ended up not being near as severe as a lot of people thought the injury to Thibodeau was not a dirty block. And anyone who's talking about Thad Moss being a dirty player and making a dirty play, every team has that play in their playbook. Kayvon Thibodeau read the block wrong. Moss in that situation did everything he could not to hurt Kayvon Thibodeau. It was just a miscommunication. It was a misread by Thibodeau, and it just ended up like it was unfortunate. Bad timing. And then they also have Nick Eubanks and undrafted free agent Justin Rigg at tight end. The battle there is definitely going to be a battle for that third tight end spot right now with Moss and Wilcox. I would probably go with Thad Moss, but that's just me. I think he's a really good blocker and really hard worker. Quarterback, of course, Joe Burrow, who's one of my MVP favorites for the year. I love Brandon Allen as a solid backup quarterback, and they have Jake Browning as their third stringer. They're in great hands at quarterback. Running back Joe Mixon has been really productive. If he had better offensive line play, his numbers would be much better. They still have Samaje Perine here, and I get it. Perine is a really good pass blocking running back usually. I don't understand why he's still their second string running back. A lot of people have come into to training camp talking up Chris Evans, and he seemed to live up to that. They still have Travion Williams, who they drafted in the 6th round in 2019, going in the last year of his rookie deal. And they also have Jaquez Patrick, who they brought in for training camp. I would say this, Perine's playing time has got to drop this year. Whether it's leaving Mixon on the field some more or giving Chris Evans more playing time, or really both, with most of that going to Evans. I really don't understand the coaching staff's fascination with Samaje Perine, other than some his pass protection, which still he's not as good as he can be. Really good. He just has these weird lapses. Moving to their defense, because that offense is going to be awesome this year. The defense, you still have DJ Reader at nose tackle. They brought BJ Hill back on the inside. Josh Tupou is still around. They drafted Zach Carter in the 3rd round, who I think is going to be a really good fit on this line. They have Tyler Shelvin, who they drafted in the 4th round last year as a backup at nose tackle. Demetrius Davis is on the roster that they brought in for training camp, and they have. I kept messing up this guy's name earlier this year. I think it's Tariquius Tisdale, who they picked up as an undrafted free agent on the interior. But I would say your rotation is going to be Reader, Hill, Carter, Tupou, and Shelvin. Those are going to be the guys on the roster. Then you've got on the outside Trey Hendrickson, who proved last year, hey, that New Orleans season was not a fluke. I am really good, and I'm going to keep being really freaking good. Sam Hubbard is starting on the other side. Last year's 3rd and 4th round picks Joseph Osai and Cam Sample are backing those guys up, and I think they'll have bigger roles this year. They also really like Khalid Kareem, who was a 5th round pick in 2020, and they drafted Jeff Gunter in the 7th round. If I remember correctly, Gunter is... Am I confusing him? He's either from Coastal Carolina or he's from Tulane. Let me check. Gunter is from Coastal Carolina. I was right. 6'4", 263. The Bengals really love strong, powerful edge players. That's why they liked Hubbard. That's why they like Sample. Now, size, a little shorter and more explosive, but he is really strong, really thick built. Gunter, once again, falls into that range as well. They also have Raymond Johnson III and journeyman veteran Noah Spence. So I really like their edge depth. And I mean, Osai was a guy that he was a guy I wouldn't have minded my Titans taking in the 1st round in 2021. I was a big fan of Osai's. Seeing him slide to the 3rd round was kind of a surprise to me. I really figured, because I figured he wouldn't go in the 1st round, but I figured he would go in the top 50 picks. And he didn't. And I was a really big fan of Cam Sample, too, last year, which I loved last year's edge class. I had a lot of those guys rated higher than other people, and, well, a lot of those guys actually ended up kind of showing out, like Azeez Ojulari and Jalen Phillips. Moving to their off-ball linebackers, their projected starters right now are Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. Not a shock. Pratt's going into last year's rookie deal. Logan Wilson going into his 3rd year. He looked really good by year's end this season. They've got Marcus Bailey, their 7th round pick in 2020, and their 4th round pick in 2020, Akeem Davis-Gaither, as their next 2 guys at linebacker, which Akeem Davis-Gaither, so many of his traits line up with Jermaine Pratt. Marcus Bailey was a Columbus, Ohio kid who didn't get an offer from Ohio State, did get one from Purdue, ended up being like the best player on Purdue's defense, and was one of the heroes of their big upset win over Ohio State a few years ago. So definitely a big fan of Marcus Bailey. And then they've brought in Clay Johnson. They have Joe Bache, who's more of a special teams guy. He's on the PUP list right now. And then Tigray Scales, Keandre Jones, and Clarence Hicks, who is an undrafted free agent. We'll see who makes the roster behind those top 4 guys. I couldn't really tell you how that's going to go. Moving to the secondary, they got Eli Apple back on a really cheap contract. He's slated to start across from Chidobe Awuzie, who had a really great season after coming over from Dallas last year. They have Mike Hilton in the slot, who they snagged from Pittsburgh. I really like Awuzie and Hilton. I still think that Eli Apple is best as a 4th corner. But that's one of the reasons they drafted Cam Taylor-Britt in the 2nd round. They also brought in, they have Trey Flowers, who they claimed off waivers from Seattle, and Jalen Davis, who's been around for a couple years. They also have undrafted free agents Alan George and Delonte Hood, along with Javarius Davis, who they picked up coming into training camp. And Cam Taylor-Britt, he's from Nebraska. A lot of people really liked him. Some people, for some reason, wanted to move him to safety. I think he very much profiles as an outside corner in the NFL. We'll see how good he ends up being, but I had him going like in the 3rd round, but you know, the Bengals have done a good job of drafting in recent years. Outside of, you might consider they haven't been the greatest drafting on the offensive line. Everywhere else, though, they've been doing a really good job of drafting. So I'm going to trust them with that. And historically, they've done a pretty good job of drafting and developing cornerbacks. But then also at safety, they're coming into the season with Von Bell and Jesse Bates, who just signed his franchise tender. So that's a really good starting 2. They have Michael Thomas, who's been on the team for a couple years now. And they drafted Dax Hill with their 1st round pick, who I think he will play all over the secondary for them. I think he might get some time in the slot as well this year, but I think he could play outside corner. There are a lot of scouts who believe his best position long term is actually outside corner. But he can do everything. He can do everything, play everywhere. And I think the Bengals are going to use that to their advantage this year. And they also had another one of my favorite day 3 picks, drafting Tyson Anderson out of Toledo in the 5th round. Because I think he's going to factor in, even if he doesn't factor in a ton this year, I think Anderson's going to make it a lot easier for them to make decisions at the safety position with veterans. Because it wouldn't shock me if eventually he and Dax Hill replace Von Bell and maybe even Jesse Bates. We'll see about that. But I'd rather keep Bates around, use Hill as like this weapon, kind of like a Tyrann Mathieu, and then have Anderson just take Von Bell's spot eventually. Anderson's really talented. Really athletic guy, too. Great size, and he's smart. And they also have Trayvon Henderson, who's an undrafted free agent in 2018 for them. Moving to the secondary. And, I mean, their defense is going to be the big thing. If their defense can play like it did towards the end of the year and the way it did in the postseason for this whole season, this team could challenge for the number, or for the 1 seed, for sure. But the questions for me are corner. Corner outside of Awuzie, like your outside corner depth, and your offensive line. Which, if they get significantly better offensive line play, that could mitigate some of the defensive stuff. Because, like, your offense is going to be even better, so your defense doesn't really have to improve much, potentially. At punter, they have undrafted free agent from last season, Drew Chrisman, who and Kevin Huber's still around, but right now they think this is the end of Kevin Huber, apparently. They have Evan McPherson, who they drafted last year, who might have been the most valuable fifth-round pick in the league last year. You know, some people say don't ever draft kickers and punters, but I think Evan McPherson was worth it, which is not a shock to me. Long snapper is Clark Harris, although they did pick up Cal Adamitis as an undrafted free agent, who most people had as the best long snapper prospect, or at least top 2, but I think most people had him as their number 1 this year. And then Trent Taylor is listed as their starting punt returner. Chris Evans is the starting kick returner. Kwame Lassiter, and this is the reason I believed he would eventually make the roster, is because I think he could, or he's going to factor into the return game. He is their backup at both those spots right now. And Travion Williams is also backing up on kick return. It's weird seeing Chris Evans as a kick returner because he's not like necessarily the burner type. Looking at their injured reserve, Elijah Holyfield, which he wouldn't have made the team at running back, I don't think anyway. Ben Brown. Yeah, that's who I thought that was. Let's see, where did Yeah, so Ben Brown was a undrafted free agent this year out of Mississippi. He's a center, so he's on injured reserve. Whoops. I wanted to do that. Let's see who else is on injured reserve here. Brandon Wilson is on the physically unable to perform list as well. Wilson is a safety out of Houston. Okay, yeah, that's who I thought that was too. Okay, so I have the Bengals winning the division. I think their offense is going to be much better this year. Their defense, if it's as good as it was the back half of last season, and if there's any improvement at the corner position across from Chidobe Awuzie, whether that's Eli Apple being more consistent or, you know, other players stepping up, whatever. The Bengals are my choice to win the division. I think they're going to be really, really good this year. And if I'm picking 2 teams right now to face off in the AFC title game, I'm picking the Bills and the Bengals right now. On paper, well, I'll talk about the Chargers and Chiefs later. But, okay. So we're going to move on to the Browns. And Browns fans, I'm really sorry that y'all have to deal with the Haslam family running your team. And some of the decisions Jimmy Haslam decides to make. But then again, you know, y'all had also made it very clear y'all wanted to move on from Baker Mayfield too, so you kind of pushed him into it. No, y'all don't want to hear that, but here we are. So anyway, we'll start with the receiver position. Made a really great trade with Dallas for Amari Cooper. That contract looks really good now. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think, is going to have a breakout in year 3. Well, he can. It's definitely going to depend on quarterback play. And y'all drafted David Bell in the 3rd round, and I don't know whether he's Keenan Allen or N'Keal Harry. He's going to be, well, he might not ever be as good as Keenan Allen, but I wonder if he's going to be more like Keenan Allen or if he's going to be N'Keal Harry. Because everything about him is like, man, he doesn't have the top end speed, but he's got all these other things on tape. But N'Keal Harry showed some wiggle and some really cool like ability with the ball in his hands in college, at Arizona State. But none of that has existed at the NFL level, and I wonder if that's going to be David Bell. But he's listed right now as y'all's starting slot receiver with Anthony Schwartz, Javon Wims, and Michael Woods II, who is a 6th-round pick this year, on the depth chart behind them. You also have Jamarcus Bradley, who's an undrafted guy in 2020. Aesop Winston, Mike Harley Jr., who's a undrafted free agent this year, as well as Dalen Baldwin, who's also an undrafted free agent this year. I mean, y'all have got a lot of speed between Cooper, Peoples-Jones, and Schwartz. Wims is a big physical guy. And I'll be honest, when it comes to Michael Woods, I was actually a little shocked he ended up getting drafted. Because I didn't have him in my top 50. I didn't even rank him among my wide receivers. I watched a little bit of tape of him, but I wasn't super impressed. So we'll see about him. But y'all have got a lot of speed. Bell's got a little bit of size to him, but not as much as some people thought. Like, he came in at 6'1", 212, but he's thick, he's strongly built, so he's not as long as Harry, and that probably means that some of the shiftiness he showed on tape probably is more real. But I wasn't as high on David Bell as some other people, so there's that. Offensive line. They made a big decision in letting J.C. Treader go. As a cost concern. Still, they have Jedrick Wills at left tackle. Joe Bitonio still at left guard. Wyatt Teller still at right guard. Jack Conklin still at right tackle. Those guys are... I mean, Wills has not been as good as some of the other tackles in this class, but I think year 3 he's going to prove that, yes, he's legit. James Hudson III, 4th-round pick in 2021, is the backup at left tackle. Michael Dunn's backing up at Bitonio at left guard. You have undrafted free agent Brock Hoffman backing up at right guard. Blake Hance backing up at right guard. And Chris Hubbard still holding it down as a backup right tackle, kind of swing lineman on the team. They picked up Ben Petrula Ben Petrula as a backup tackle. Well, he was an undrafted free agent. He's on the roster. He probably won't make the final roster. It would surprise me if Hayolte Froholt made the roster. I actually think Drew Forbes could end up making this or the final roster here. And they also have Alex Taylor, David Moore, and Nakia Griffin Stewart. Oh wait, that's tied in. The depth chart moved on me again. Okay. I think they've got a guy injured right now that I'm missing. Let's see. Let's look at their reserves right now. Well, of course, Deshaun Watson suspended. You got Elijah Konsa. That's not who I'm looking for. Oh, yeah. Jakeem Grant's on the roster, but he's on injured reserve. Stephen Weatherly's on injured reserve. Isaiah Weston, who's one of my favorite small school prospects, is here, but he's on injured reserve. So is Nick Harris. Nick Harris was supposed to, I think, be, or was it Dawson Deaton was supposed to be the next, or the start. People expect to be the starting center. I think they, because I knew Nick Harris was on the roster. I don't know when he's going to be back. I don't know when Deaton is going to be back either. But I know the coaching staff really, really, really likes Dawson Deaton, who's a rookie. But Harris, I think a lot of people believed was going to turn out to be the starting center, but he's hurt. So you got Ethan Pocic starting there. That's definitely the weak spot in the line. That's the big question mark. We'll move on. Tight end David Njoku on a new contract. Harrison Bryant now taking over as the number 2 tight end. I really liked Harrison Bryant coming out of FAU. They have Miller Forrestall, who they brought in as a free agent in 2021, former Alabama tight end, solid, rotational tight end. I talked about, or I accidentally brought up Stuart Griffin a minute ago. And then you also have, his name's off the screen right now. Zaire Mitchell Payton, who's a undrafted free agent who, I'll be honest, I don't think I watched any tape of this draft cycle. So, I know I didn't rank him among my tight ends. Quarterback right now, because Watson's out, although we know how many games he's out 11 games. So you're getting 11 games of most likely Jacoby Brissett, but Josh Dobbs has showed some flashes in preseason. I'd love to see him get a shot. And then you got Josh Rosen behind them. But it looks like Josh Dobbs is going to be your backup quarterback for most season, and that's cool for me as a Vols fan. Let Dobbs get his shot. Come on. We know Brissett is a bland starter at best. Dobbs is more exciting. He was also better than Brissett in college. Nick Chubb, what's to say about the running back position? You've got a guy who's arguably the second best running back in the league. Kareem Hunt wants a trade, but, he's really good. You've got Dearness Johnson behind him, who I think they feel fine as their second running back. They made a really good pickup in Jerome Ford in the 5th round because they see, we're not going to be able to keep Hunt and maybe not even Dearness Johnson around at a price we're okay with. And they also have Demetric Felton, who they drafted in the last round, who's also going to factor in at receiver and in the return game. It would not shock me if they've got all 5 of those guys on the roster once the season starts. And also the same with John Kelly, their 6th running back. Because he provides a lot on special teams. And they also have fullback Johnny Stanton the 4th. Although I'll say this, it's like Felton makes the team. He's technically probably making it more as a receiver than a running back. But if Kelly makes the roster, that probably means they've traded one or both of Hunt and Johnson. Moving to the defense, and this is the thing with the Browns, they have a really, really good roster, but it's the quarterback position, as it always is with the Browns. But that defensive line, Myles Garrett, of course, just a game wrecker. Jordan Elliott, 2023rd round pick, really came on last year. They signed Taven Bryan. Good luck with that. Jadeveon Clowney is starting on the other edge. He had a really good season for them last year. They made a really good trade trading Mack Wilson for Chase Winovich, who also, his number is really nice. And they drafted Alex Wright in the 3rd round out of UAB. Didn't think he'd go that high, but I didn't mind the pick. I thought Perrion Winfrey would get drafted ahead of him. They were able to get him in the 4th round. They've gotten some really good value, in my opinion, at the defensive tackle spot in recent years. Getting Tommy Togiai in the 4th round was a really good pick last year. And then undrafted free agents, they brought in Roderick Perry and Glenn Logan. But I really like, if Winfrey or Togiai eventually takes Brian's spot as a starter, I'd probably like that rotation better, but we'll see. On the edges, like I said, behind Garrett and Clowney, Wright, and Winovich, they also have Curtis Weaver, who was a guy I was really high on the year he was drafted. He got waived by Miami. Isaac Rochelle. They also spent a 7th round pick on Isaiah Thomas this year, and they have Chris Odom, who they picked up for training camp. If Weaver makes the roster, I'm still holding out some hope for Weaver. That could be a really fun 5-man edge rotation with him behind Wright, Winovich, Connie, and Garrett. Linebacker position. This position looks really good for them now. Joker, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was a huge steal last year. One of the biggest value gets in the draft for him. He fell out of the top 50 when he shouldn't have fallen outside of the top 20. Anthony Walker is a really solid linebacker. Sion Takitaki as your 3rd linebacker, I think is really good. They have 5th round pick from last year, Tony Fields, the 2nd. Jacob Phillips, who was a 3rd rounder in 2020, still has a lot of upside, backing up at middle linebacker, and Dakota Allen, who they picked up from the Jaguars, who's kind of more of a special teams guy. They also have Willie Harvey and Jordan Kunajic at linebacker. But I like their linebacker group, especially the top end of it. Moving to the secondary. Now, if healthy, this team is going to have, in my opinion, I just really love their secondary. Denzel Ward is a legit number 1 corner. Greedy Williams and Greg Newsome are both awesome. Well, I say awesome as secondary corners, which Newsome, they've got him listed as the starting slot. He'll play outside a lot. Williams is just such a great ball hawk. He's had problems staying healthy and some consistency issues, but the traits there are ridiculous. And I really like the Martin Emerson pick in the 3rd round as another physical outside corner. They have Herb Miller as their backup slot, and 2020 undrafted free agent AJ Green, who they really like, also backing up on the outside. They picked up Sean Jolly as an undrafted free agent this year, and they have Lavert Hill, who they brought in for training camp. Although those two guys probably don't make the roster. Safety, they're really deep. John Johnson, in my opinion, is the most underrated safety in the league. Him and Amani Hooker, because Johnson's rated higher, or by most people, than Hooker. Hooker was so good. He graded out as one of the best safeties in the league last year, and no one talks about it. John Johnson, though, really good. The fact that the Rams lost him in free agency last year, and their defense was so good, and they did a good job replacing him and their defensive coordinator, is just wild to me. Because Johnson's really, really freaking good. And then Grant Delpit has really turned into a really good starter. And then they have Ronnie Harrison Jr. and Richard LeCount behind those guys. Those are solid backup options. DeAnthony Bell is an undrafted free agent, and they have Javonte Moffitt behind them. But I'm definitely a real big fan of their secondary group. When it comes to special teams, you've got Corey Borquez at punter, and they drafted Cade York in the 4th round. There's some people who kind of laughed about a kicker in the 4th round, but like I said, Evan McPherson was absolutely worth the 5th round pick last year, and I think Cade York is a better kicker. Personally. I mean, Cade York kicked maybe the highest degree of difficulty field goal I have seen in person in college football history to beat Evan McPherson and the Florida Gators back in 2020. A 57-yard field goal on wet ground through fog with that kick was just insane. And then they have Charlie Hewlett as their long snapper. But I'm a huge fan of Cade York. I think Cade York he's going to be a really, really great kicker for a long time. And then Demetric Felton is the only named return man on their depth chart, or on the Browns depth chart here. And I know they're bummed that Jakeem Grant is on IR right now. Same with Stephen Weatherly and Isaiah Weston. Well, a number of these guys. So far, no one else has had this many guys on injured reserve out of any of the freaking depth charts I've seen. Which, I guess they're only the 7th one I've gone over, but whatever. But, just to kind of show you Isaiah Weston. This guy's 6'4", 215 out of Northern Iowa. Which, I thought he was 6'3", 220, whatever. 6'4", 214 out of Northern Iowa. Dude had like a 4.4 second 40, 4.4, 4.42. He had like a 42 or 43 inch, I think it was like a 42-inch vertical jump, 41-inch vertical jump. He had a ridiculous broad jump. He's really strong, really explosive. I couldn't believe that he went undrafted. Like, the Browns got him undrafted. I think I had him ranked like 20th at receiver. So, there's that. I think the Browns are going to finish at the bottom of the division this year because of quarterback play. And maybe a little bit out of spite. And here's the funny thing. It wouldn't shock me if the Panthers ended up with a better record than the Cleveland Browns this year. Just saying. Which, speaking of injuries and the Panthers, Matt Corral just went on IR. He's out for the season with a foot injury. So that means your quarterbacks in Carolina for the year will be Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold. So, moving on to the Steelers, and they've got this listed wrong. So they have Chase Claypool listed as the slot and Deontay Johnson as the left wide receiver, which, maybe in base packages, but in a 3-wide set, Claypool will be on the outside. Deontay Johnson will be in the slot. He is one of the slottiest slot receivers that ever slot receivered, and he plays almost exclusive, or he plays most of his snaps in the slot. So that's where he's going to play most of his snaps, the slot. George Pickens is already listed as a starter. He has been outstanding in camp, and chalk one up for Brett Coleman already. Behind them, though, is going to be fun. They've got Calvin Austin, who they got in the 4th round. I thought that was a great value pick. He's going to help in the return game. He's going to give them explosive speed and quickness. They signed Miles Boykin, who is a former Baltimore Raven. They picked him up off of waivers at some point. Miles Boykin, tall, athletic, but he's not really developed in anything. Cody White is here. They brought in Gunnar Olszewski from New England to be a special teams player. He'll also factor in to the slot. They have Steven Sims, who's kind of a bigger receiver. Well, I'm thinking of the right player here. No. This is the Kansas guy. I'm thinking of another Sims. Might be Sam. He might be Sam Sims. Steven Sims, former Kansas player. He broke out like a couple years ago. He had like a weird kind of breakout playing the slot position for the Commanders when they were still the Washington football team. He could make the roster. I'd love to see Tyler Vaughns make the roster, former USC receiver. They also have Tyler Snead, who they got undrafted. from East Carolina. Really small guy, 5'7", 175. He seems more like the camp body type. Like, I don't see him making it in the league. But then again, who would have said Gunnar Olszewski or Julian Edelman were going to make it? But, I mean, he is 5'7", 174. That's a little different. With that being said, Cody White here. Michigan State. That's what I thought. He's a big body Michigan State dude. Still, it's really weird to see him that high on the depth chart, like above guys like Vaughns and Olszewski and Sims. And to a degree, like, maybe he's not above Boykin because this is kind of sides, but still. They've got guys like Pickens and Claypool and even Boykin. It's like White just seems like, I don't know. Anyway, really like their receiver position though. And I think they've got a guy who's injured who's not shown here. Jeremy McNichols, running backs on IR. Tazar Skipper, who's like a special teamer type linebacker. Anthony Miller, that's who. I thought there was a receiver on IR, and it's Anthony Miller. Master Teague, rookie running backs, also on IR, unfortunately. And safety Carl Joseph is currently on injured reserve. I was like, Anthony Miller on this team? Yep. Moving on to the offensive line. This is a position they've really been working on the last couple years. Last year's fourth-round pick, Dan Moore, they believe is their left tackle of the future. They have Ochoma Okorafor locked up as their right tackle. They extended him. They might have extended him going into last year, but I know they extended him. On the interior, Mason Cole, they signed him from Minnesota at center. And he looks like he's going to lock that down. Kevin Dotson last year locked down the starting left guard spot. They really like him. And they signed James Daniels. I really thought Daniels was going to take that center spot. We were going to see 2021 third-round pick Kendrick Green snag that right guard spot, or Green would snag the center spot. But it looks like Green is going to be their kind of interior swing guy for now. They've also got J.C. Hassenhauer on the roster and John Leglue. And it is raining again. My gosh. Like, it just won't stop, like, having these just monsoons here in Beaumont. It is crazy. All right. Anyway, moving on down, their backup tackles are Joe Haig and Trent Scott. They also have Chaz Green, who I believe was on the roster before those guys. But and they also have Adrian Ely that they brought in, former OU offensive tackle. And then Ryan McCollum and William Dunkel. Dunkel they brought in for training camp. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got everybody. Green could make the roster potentially, but I'd say it would probably be down between him and Scott at tackle. But they should be better on the offensive line this year. And James Daniels, I thought that contract was one of the best contracts in free agency. Tight end Pat Freiermuth is going into year 2. I think he's going to benefit as much as anybody from moving on to younger options at quarterback, particularly once Kenny Pickett takes that starting job, which he should start from week 1. Like, he will benefit the most from Pickett becoming the starter. Zach Gentry is their backup tight end. 2019 fifth-round pick. He is stupid tall at 6'8", 265, but his movement skills aren't, like, amazing. But solid rotational tight end. They drafted Connor Hayward in the 6th round out of Michigan State. He's kind of like a move tight end fullback type, though. I thought he would go undrafted. And they also have Kevin Rader and Jace Sternberger, who cannot stay healthy. Sternberger was a prospect that I really liked at tight end as a receiving option going to the next level, but has not worked out. And Hayward's more of a blocker type tight end, which makes him a good option for a third tight end. And he can also back up Derek Watt at fullback. Running back, quarterback, you got Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and Kenny Pickett. They signed Trubisky to a contract, but it's not like a big one. And Pickett's been good enough this preseason that I'd rather just go with Pickett. Because I don't think, a year in Buffalo, sitting behind Josh Allen with Brian Daboll. I think it was just a year. I think it was a year. I don't see that as fixing Mitch Trubisky. Most likely. And I just really like Kenny Pickett. Moving to running back, you got Najee Harris, Benny Snell, Anthony McFarland, and two rookies in Jalen Warren, who they got undrafted, and Max Borghi, who they picked up after the Colts released him after picking him up initially undrafted. The Colts have such a deep running back room, and their undrafted group at running back was ridiculous too. So, because they had like 3 guys that I really liked undrafted. Borghi's one of them. He's a third down type back. Like, he played at Washington State, and he has great hands, and he can pass protect. I actually like him. Warren out of Oklahoma State is very much in that Benny Snell, like, he's not going to be a breakaway player, but he can haul the load for you. He can pound it between the tackles. Anthony McFarland is more in that third down role. Considering you've got Snell and Harris, I feel like Warren, which Harris can play all 3 downs. McFarland's more of a third down guy, but I'd rather keep Borghi around than Warren if I'm going to carry 4 running backs because of who they have on their roster. Moving to defense, they were able to get Larry Ogunjobi on the cheap after he failed a physical with Chicago. Pittsburgh was involved in 2 insults to injury for the Chicago Bears this offseason. One, the James Daniel contract that they got him on to take him away from there, and then ending up with Larry Ogunjobi. Tyson Alualu is back at nose tackle. He's been really solid for them there. Cameron Hayward's back. Stephon Tuitt retired this offseason. A little suddenly but he had been kind of talking about it even last year. It seems like his mind's on other things. Because physically speaking, he's awesome still. So that's a big loss, but I think Ogunjobi's going to be a nice fit there. They've still got Chris Wormley backing him up. They brought back Montravius Adams. He's currently slated as the backup nose tackle. They signed him to a nice contract. They like Isaiah Loudermilk, who they drafted in the 5th round last year. They drafted DeMarvin Leal in the 3rd round this year. It wouldn't surprise me if midway through the season he's already jumped Wormley and Loudermilk in the pecking order. And he'll eventually turn into their starter at that position. He landed in a perfect developmental spot for him and a perfect fit for him. They still have Carlos and Khalil Davis, the Davis brothers. They picked up Donovan Jeter as an undrafted free agent this year, and they also have Henry Moncho on the roster. Still really solid on the defensive interior. On the edge, of course, you got T.J. Watt, arguably the best edge player in football, along with Alex Highsmith, who they drafted in the 3rd round 2020, who's really good. So good, in fact, they were totally cool with losing Bud Dupree. Behind them, though, the depth's kind of shaky, and I've really kind of questioned some of their decision-making there. Rondell Carter, who they just kind of picked up off the street this offseason, late this offseason. Derek Tuska, who they picked up last year. Delonte Scott, James Vaughters, Hamilcar Rashad Jr. Like, none of these guys to me really move the needle. So if Watt or Highsmith gets hurt this year, I think they're going to be in really bad shape on the edge. Now, interior linebacker, inside linebacker, Devin Bush, if he's healthy this year, and Miles Jack, if he stays healthy this year, like, getting Miles Jack on the contract they did after the Jaguars decided to release him, I think is huge. Like, if those guys are healthy, they've got arguably the rangiest linebacker pair in the league, and a really high upside group, or a pair right there. Robert Spillane and Marcus Allen behind them. Allen is on a second contract with them after they drafted him in the 5th round in 2018. Robert Spillane was a cheap pickup for them. They drafted Mark Robinson in the 7th round this year, and they have Buddy Johnson they drafted in the 4th round last year. And it really would shock me if Buddy Johnson didn't jump Spillane and Allen this year in the pecking order. And I think it would kind of disappoint the Steelers if he doesn't. Well, I say kind of. It would definitely disappoint the Steelers if he doesn't. Moving to corner, they had another one of the better value signings of free agency, Levi Wallace, who has just been a solid number 2 corner his entire career in Buffalo. People just keep deciding Levi Wallace isn't good enough, and he just keeps, walking on to Alabama, going undrafted and becoming an NFL starter. Let's doubt him again. Akilo Witherspoon, after they traded for him, or agreed to a trade to get him from Seattle, he's been really good for them. Cameron Sutton is one of the best slot corners in the league. They really trust him there. Behind them, 2020 undrafted free agent James Pierre, 2019 third-round pick Justin Lane, and Arthur Mollett are your backups, along with 2022 undrafted free agent Chris Steele. That's your secondary depth chart. They like James Pierre, but really beyond Witherspoon, Sutton, and Wallace, it's a lot of question and prove-its there. Now, safety, they're pretty deep. Now, Minkah Fitzpatrick, one of the best safeties in the league. Really versatile, really impactful player. They still have Terrell Edmonds at strong safety. They brought in DeMonte Casey. They like Trey Norwood, who they drafted in the 7th round last year. They brought in Miles Killebrew, which is still one of the best, most appropriate names for a safety I've ever seen. Lyndon Stevens is here. Donovan Steiner, and then they have Carlins Platel, who they brought in as an undrafted free agent. Really, beyond Killebrew Stevens here, those other 2 guys aren't going to factor into anything. Stevens may not either. But they do like Norwood. I think their safety group's pretty decent. I like the Steelers roster, but it's going to be, it all comes down to quarterback play. There's questions because it's Mitchell Trubisky and then a rookie quarterback, and then if in a disaster scenario, Mason Rudolph. It's like either Kenny Pickett wins this job and is kind of like Mac Jones last year from the jump, or the Steelers aren't making the playoffs. But I do have them ahead of the Browns in the pecking order right now. And a lot of that has to do with their coaching staff. I also think the Browns have the worst coaching staff in the division. Because after a promising kind of first year, like I've not really been impressed with their what is their coach's name? Kevin Stefanski. Punter, they've got Presley Harvin, who they drafted in the last or in the 7th round last year, and they have Chris Boswell at kicker. Boswell's really good. Christian Kuntz at long snapper. And then Gunnar Olszewski is listed as their starting return man with Calvin Austin behind him, and then Anthony McFarland. Some their injured players, notably Jeremy McNichols, who is a solid, backup running back. Tazar Skipper, Anthony Miller, Carl Joseph, who would also factor into that safety depth, and then Master Teague, who another young running back, which is probably him being on injured reserve is probably when they brought in Borghi. Anyway, although he's more like Jalen Warren, kind of like a more physical, pound it back. So, talking about the AFC North, to kind of wrap up the AFC North here and wrap up the show. I'm picking the Bengals to win North. I think they're going to win. I think you're looking at a 12-5 season for the Bengals. I think you're looking at a 11-6 season for the Ravens. Remember that it's 17 games now. 12-5 was, or the teams that went 12-5 last year. You better get out of there, cat. Cat bit me and caused me to pop my leg up and hit my freaking desk. Oh, cat. That hurt. Anyway. Didn't even know he was under there. Or he had walked under there. Anyway, so Bengals, I think they're going to go 12-5. Ravens 11-6. I really need to have all the teams in front of me when I do this. I might do record predictions at the end and just talk about records after kind of talking about all the teams. And that way I kind of have everything in front of me. So I'm like, well, not all these teams can go these records. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Anyway, I think the Steelers are going to be kind of around that 8-win range. 8, 9, somewhere in there. I think they're going to be kind of where they were last year. Borderline playoff team. And the Browns have the roster. And if they could get the best out of Jacoby Brissett, maybe they can get to that 9-win threshold. Maybe. I'm not convinced because the AFC is so tough and the AFC North is so tough. And I feel like Dobbs gives them actually a chance at something more than what Brissett can give them, especially from an athletic standpoint and some of the stuff you can do, more varied stuff you can do with your offense with Dobbs. But I could also, I feel like there's definitely more unknown with Dobbs, but that unknown leads to more possibilities, I guess more outcomes. But I see the Browns at the bottom of the division and probably sending a top 10 pick to the Houston Texans next year. Which, tough pill to swallow, but you deserve it. Cleveland deserves it at this point, in my opinion. Sorry, Browns fans. But that's the way I feel about the division. If you feel otherwise, drop a comment after the show. And I hope to see y'all again tomorrow. I will be streaming tomorrow. Same time. Well, hopefully on time at 3 o'clock. Hopefully this, or Streamlabs decides to keep my stuff this time. Oh gosh, that gave me a heart attack earlier today. So anyway,